All right.
Thank you for tuning in to Grieving Voices. Today, my guest is Hannah Howard. She is a writer and food expert who spent her formative years in New York eating, drinking, serving, bartending, cooking on a line, flipping giant wheels of cheese, and managing restaurants. She writes about delicious things, teaches food writing classes, and her memoir, Feast, True Love in and Out of the Kitchen, debuted as Amazon's #1 bestselling memoir in 2018, and her new book, Plenty, a memoir of food and family, is out now. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
And as I kind of mentioned before we started recording, that this is a very timely conversation for me. Just, I don't know, food just keeps coming up in my world lately.
Ooh, I love that.
Yeah, because really we have a relationship with food. It's a relationship. And I mean, for me personally, it didn't really, I never was taught or shown, or it wasn't emulated for me that is a real thing, like to enjoy food or savor it, or, the preparation of it, or, anyway, we'll get to that. But I'm interested in learning um, how your relationship to food started for you in childhood and over the years.
Absolutely. Well, I've always loved food, but it's always been a little bit more complicated than that. The love came, I feel very lucky that I grew up with a mom who's a great cook and a food lover. And one of my best childhood memories, I grew up in Baltimore, and we used to go on these to me, they were like great adventures to get groceries for the week. And we would go to this amazing local farmers market. We would go to visit Mrs. Mastalone at this little Italian grocery store where this proprietress would be kneading curds to make fresh mozzarella. And if I was lucky, I'd get a taste. And we'd go to the Near East bakery and have this amazing halva and olives. And just, I felt really lucky, and like this was so fun. And then being part of the transformation where my mom would cook these ingredients into delicious things. But then from a very young age, I was also the tallest girl in my class. I was the first to get breasts. And I also just had a anxiety and a dissatisfaction with my body that felt really intense, and kind of increasingly so as I grew up. And so on the one hand, I've had this really genuine joy and respect and love around food. And on the other hand, I've had a sort of fear and obsession around food. I messed around with all kinds of diets and this and that, and trying to change my body. And this kind of morphed into an eating disorder that I've now thankfully been in recovery for many years. But I think for me, part of the journey, and you're right, food is such a relationship that we all have, has been untangling that first really positive part from the really dark, hard part of my food relationship, and really leaning into the former and kind of turning down the volume on all that fear, obsession, worry that used to take up such a huge part of my life.
How old were you when that kind of started to develop?
I was really young, I think around middle school or even before. I mean, I remember having these kind of like just feeling like my body was wrong and there was something wrong with me. And then around college, it really kind of spiraled. I had I had a diagnosis in college of anorexia nervosa, which even at the time I was like, this is part of the story, but it's not the whole story, because I was just kind of always in this limbo between trying to restrict my food and binging, and my weight would go up and down. And it was really a painful way to live. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. And then the anorexia kind of outwardly got better because I was at a normal weight. but I was not at any kind of peace with myself or with my food for several more years until I kind of was sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I had this last epic binge and was really like using food as a weapon to hurt myself in a way. And I'm now, I mean, looking back now, I'm kind of grateful because it spurred me to reach out for help. And the reaching out for help was the beginning of really recovering, changing, and repairing and healing my relationship with food and myself.
May I ask what was happening in your life outwardly and around you in your environment and things when the
Yeah.
food control thing started to take shape?
Yeah. I mean, I have so many things were so good, which was always kind of this, felt like this mystery to me. Like, you know, I grew up in Baltimore, and then when we were in high school, we moved to the New Jersey suburbs, which I was very unhappy about, very mad at my parents. And I have always been kind of a city girl, and I loved New York City and wanted to go to college there. And I got into my dream school. I went to Columbia, and that was what I really wanted to do. And I was so excited. And so many things were good. And I had some amazing friends. I had some amazing opportunities. And also, meanwhile, so Feast, my first book, tells the story of working through restaurants, because that first part of this food relationship I described, I think, was a huge piece in propelling me to get jobs around food. And so I worked in some amazing New York City restaurants, cheese places, and really fell in love with that world. So there were so many things that were amazing in my life. I have an incredible supportive family, but I had this like deep secret because I was so ashamed of this eating disorder and my struggle with food. I didn't feel safe telling anyone. I could barely admit it to myself, much less any friends or family. So it's like a really lonely experience carrying this around. And it was this big, and I think looking back too, there was this sort of big disconnect between things on the outside which were good and things on the inside which were miserable.
So where do you think that self-hatred was coming from? Because I'm kind of digging further into this for people listening, for parents, for mothers. I'm a mother. I have two teenage girls, a 12, like she's going to be 13 and a 15-year-old pretty soon. So I'm really just interested in, because when I look at their environment, like we have great family life and things, so I want some insight as a parent. And can you share a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a parent too. I'm a new mom. I have an 18-month-old daughter,
Oh,
and I'm
congratulations.
expecting another one. Thank you.
Oh,
So it's
congratulations.
something, yeah, yeah, and it's something I think a lot about because I think in some part eating disorders are like I think most addictions a kind of family disease. And I don't know how much of this is nature and how much of this is nurture. I really don't think that my family did anything wrong, but I do, with a lot of compassion, and I've written about this. I did watch my mom struggle with her weight and her own kind of journey to accept herself. And she was always on and off different diets and losing and gaining weight. And so I definitely don't blame her. I think that we're all a product of this diet culture that I've been learning more about. And the more I learn about it, the more I see that it's really in the air we breathe. Like we're really taught these lessons kind of implicitly that like thinness is goodness. And I think slowly that is starting to change. Even like when I was growing up, I never saw images of bodies that didn't look like one very specific way. And I think now there are more images of bodies that look other ways, but I think there's still a long way to go. So it's really tough. I don't, and I hope like I really don't want to pass this on to my kids, but I also don't know how much control that any one of us has. Besides, I know that the best thing I can do for myself is to continue to recover myself and, you know, build this my own positive relationship with all of this stuff, and then the rest. I wish I had a better answer.
No, I think you kind of did. And I think really just like how we are taught, I have a post coming up about this because I came across something on the web the other day, and it kind of just, the person stated that children don't know how to grieve. And that really rubbed me the wrong way, because we come out of the womb knowing how to grieve. We come out of the womb crying. And for the next for the next first 3 years of our life, we're expressing ourselves openly and without any thought of, who am I going to offend if I cry, or who, you know what I mean? We don't have, we naturally express ourselves up until the point, because by age 3, we've learned almost 75% of the skills that we need to deal with difficult challenges in our life. Can you believe that, by age 3?
Wow.
So those early years are the most formative for setting the foundation for relationship to food or how we grieve, right? So, I mean, there's a lot that I wish I could undo in that regard, because I wasn't healing myself either, like in my grief. It took me many years. And so I look back of how different of a mom I am today. I'm sure you look at your experience and, oh my gosh, almost thankful for that experience, because it makes you a better parent, right? Having had that experience.
Absolutely.
And so I think it's emulating what a healthy relationship to food looks like, what grieving looks like in a healthy way. And so no, I think that's a great answer. I mean, that's basically what you had said. And the best thing we can do as parents is to heal ourselves, to work on ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is a lot harder than, say this thing, or, you know, just do this thing. It's a lot deeper work, but I think it's absolutely true.
I just, on 60 Minutes last night, I was watching, I don't know if you saw the whole Facebook whistleblower story, but if you watch the news piece, she actually added and went on to say that Facebook's own research into Instagram verifies and shows that Instagram is actually harmful for teenage girls. It is doing more harm than good. And they had actually talked about creating a platform for Instagram for teens, or for the younger people, but they've put that on the back burner. And it just makes me think that, geez, I wonder, I never really gave it much thought, because my oldest daughter is on Instagram, and yeah, it's really making me rethink that, you know? And here's the thing too, like what's come up for me too, in preparing for this episode, is me reflecting on my own relationship to food, and how I tend to not eat when I get like in the zone, or I mean, I can, oh, it's 3 o'clock, I haven't eaten anything. My daughter has actually, she will feed me. She will bring me food to make sure that I eat. But so yes, I mean, I told you before we started recording that this is really a timely conversation for me too. So again, thank you for sharing your story. What I would like to hear is more about that turning point for you, and then what that has looked like since.
The turning point of kind of from the struggle to the other side.
Like you were sick and tired of being sick and tired. Like I've said that about, that's what happened. That's what I said to myself when I was like, just like had one more loss experience. I'm like, I am sick and tired of being sick and tired. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think I really thought for many years that this was just something that I was going to have to deal with and struggle with and slog through forever. Like it was just my burden in life to bear this. And I am kind of so glad that I reached that point. I guess like people talk like alcoholics and stuff talk about like a bottom, or I mean, it really felt like that to me. It was just like it was just so exhausting to keep. At this point, I was kind of I would get this like new resolution to diet harder and to really restrict, and I would for I don't know. Sometimes it was days, sometimes it was weeks, sometimes it was months. But then it would always, and I think also biologically, like we're not supposed to starve ourselves. Our bodies are really smart and they want to be nourished. And then so I would, and then inevitably it would result, the pendulum would swing the other way and it would result in some sort of binge. And then I'd feel ashamed and embarrassed and vow to diet better and harder next time. And that went on like for many years. And it's just not a really fun way to live at all. I think kind of breaking these promises to ourselves is really hard. Um, the shame was really hard. Like I said before, the loneliness, I think that was really what got me, because I was just hiding this from, or trying to hide it. I think people really close to me probably were smart enough to see something was going on. But um, so I, let's see, so I went, um, at the time because I was looking for like answer, you know, while part of me felt like this was my life, another part of me had some hope. And I was looking, you know, so I would read, I was kind of embarrassed. I would go to the self-help section at Barnes and Noble and kind of like choose a book that felt more like intellectual or something. But then I have a different book, and I was reading something, and the author was a coach, and I just on a whim decided to email her. And I think I couldn't, you know, I was in my early 20s. I couldn't afford her services, but I think she offered to talk with me for like a few minutes on the phone very generously. And she suggested this group that met for eating disorder recovery. And I didn't even expect, like it sort of came out to her. I didn't even expect that I was going to talk about this. And I kind of felt like I had nothing to lose, and I went. And it was kind of like a light bulb experience to hear people share out loud the things that kind of went on in my, like in the deepest, darkest crevices of my mind, but I had never spoken out loud. And then not only did they say these things, like things that they did with food, their own feelings, their own complicated stories, and then they would just like laugh and give each other hugs. And my mind was blown. I was like, what is this? It felt weird. It felt definitely uncomfortable. I was nervous. But I was like, this is incredible. I think I'm so grateful for a part of me that felt like, and I think so much of that was just being around people who understood what I was going through. And I kept going back, and I met people who understood. And I think that was this huge shift of not doing this, not trying to do this alone, not in the secret corner of Barnes and Noble with my secret book, but having people to share with honestly and openly, and people who had been where I had been, but now we're experiencing life and food and their bodies in this totally different way. And it gave me this kind of hope that something else really was possible and there was a different way for me to live.
So in conjunction with the group that you met with, did you do therapy as well, or what kind of along with that helped you the most?
Yes, I did. And I'm still go to therapy today, which I find incredibly helpful. But, you know, I had gone to therapy before. I had gone a few times in high school and college. And I feel like it could only, for me anyway, it was nothing. I think I probably saw wonderful therapists, but they could only work with what I was willing to share and where I was willing to, how I was willing to show up. And I just feel like I wasn't quite ready. And something about this group, I think, made me feel like I was. And so that work that I was doing in therapy felt so much more like it was getting to the heart of things. And I was so much more willing to be honest, even when it was hard. And so yeah, therapy has really helped. The group has really helped. Sometimes just like time has helped. And even little, like there's just so many little actions that I've added up. We just talked about Instagram, like being really mindful about who I follow on Instagram helps, how I spend my time. Just these little choices I make throughout the day that either can support my recovery or not so much.
And what does that look like today? What does recovery look like? And how many years has it been?
It's been almost 10 years now, which is amazing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it looks really different. You know, when I was in the beginning, early stages, I would go to these groups like all the time. And I'm 30, I just turned 34. So it was a different time in my life. And I had more time to kind of really dig in. I would make phone calls to fellow people in recovery. I read everything I could. I was really like kind of seeking it out as if my life depended on it, which it did. But then over the years, like my life has grown in these amazing ways. And a few years ago, I got married and I have kids, and I also publish books and and I have a busy work. And so life has gotten bigger. And so I feel like it's really been important for me to keep recovery as a sort of foundation in my life, because I know that without it, all those other things don't go too well at all. So, but I don't go to like all these meetings all the time. I don't, but I still see my therapist. I still have a community of people that I've met in these groups that I text or call on occasion, and they've become friends who I really value. And when things, I think it's like living inside of my own brain and heart is like a completely different experience than it was 10 years ago. But I think I always will. I still have moments where like I look at a picture of myself and I freak out, or I eat something and then my brain's so noisy about like, what was that? What's going to happen? And today when that happens, I kind of have like a plan of how to deal with it. I have, again, like people it's always worse in my head. It's always better when I can just like share it with someone, kind of dissipates. And I kind of think about how I could either go down that road of obsession and kind of stay in that misery, or I can turn my thoughts elsewhere. And what else can I do? How can I be present in my life? And I try to choose that second option as much as I can.
What do you think has, I had a question and it escaped my brain. I'll have to edit this out. This happens a lot.
That's what editing's for.
Yep. Do you think you would be now if you were still in your, how should I word this? Do you believe you'd be where you are now had you, well, A, not had that experience, and B, would still feel that torment within you? And I know the answer, but I want to hear you say
Right.
it.
No, I mean, I think this has shaped who I am in so many ways, and so many of those ways I believe are for the better. I think dealing with this has given me so much compassion for what, not everyone has an eating disorder, but everyone has some, everyone struggles, everyone has something, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be a substance. It can be with relationships, it can be with work, it can be with money, it can be, we all have our stuff. So I think it's really given me not only that compassion for others, but also so much more kindness and compassion for myself, because my first like go-to is to be incredibly hard on myself and such a perfectionist and incredibly mean to myself. And a big thing too that I'm learning in recovery is to like slowly ease up on that. And it's also given me a way to connect with other people. I used to really think that I was supposed to present this sort of shiny, perfect exterior, and that's how I would like win acceptance in the world. But it's so like, that's not what appeals to me about other people. And, you know, people don't share stories about how they were awesome. They share embarrassing stories because like, you know, there's something about humanity that we relate to the hard stuff. And so it's just given me such a better understanding, I think. And I think it's made me a better, I think a better mom, a better friend, a better writer, all of that.
Yeah. And when you said, you know, everyone has their stuff, but every single person has a relationship to food. All of
That's
us
true too.
do.
That's true too. And you know, not everyone has an eating disorder, but that doesn't mean everyone has like a perfect rosy relationship with food. It can be hard for all of us at times.
Well, and here's my question. This is actually one of the things I wrote down. So, you know, when we think of eating disorder, we think of anorexia or bulimia, but what about addictions, like an addiction to sugar? And is that addiction to sugar perpetuated by the food industry? And so,
Mhm. Yeah.
you know, so what do you have to say about that? What are your thoughts on
Yeah.
that?
I think that, yeah, right. I think, you know, I think that was part of my uneasiness with having an eating disorder, was that I had this idea of this like little blonde anorexic girl from like an after school special.
Mm.
But eating disorders don't always look like that at all, right? Anorexia and bulimia exist, as does binge eating disorder, as does, in the official diagnostic manual, it's called EDNOS, eating disorder not otherwise specified, which was my diagnosis for a long time, which is like the most frustrating diagnosis because what does that mean? But it's so true. There's so many ways to have like disorder, like a lack of order in our lives around food. And, you know, people of all, this also gets kind of thought of as like a privileged young woman's disease, but that's not the case. Like men struggle with this, people of all backgrounds and experiences. I was also kind of like, I read stuff about how like, oh, French people have this amazing relationship with food. And then I also met like French people in my recovery group. It's like, no, this anyone can struggle with this. And it can look all different ways. And definitely like sort of right, there's a restricting side and then there's a binging overeating side too. And I do think of my eating disorder as an addiction, not necessarily to like a substance. There's a lot of controversy within the recovery community whether or not like sugar is addictive. I'm not a doctor, like I don't know, but for me the addiction was kind of the obsession, like making food this huge power over my life and my day. And, you know, waking up in the morning and if thinking about what I ate the day before and not determining whether it was a good day or not, like that sort of thing. It really did feel like an addictive behavior. And just the things I would do with food, the sneaking it, the lying about it, just this obsession. So I think that there are a lot of parallels with addiction, whether or not, I don't know whether food is addictive, but it certainly can be. I mean, we've all had that experience, right? Of like starting to eat something and then being like, oh my gosh, it's gone. What happened? So yeah,
Yeah,
it's complicated.
it's very multi-layered. And thank you for
Yeah.
bringing up that it's not just this blonde small girl problem, in that because my son, actually he's 16 and he was the smallest kid in his class, scrawny, thin, bony, I mean bony structure, but always the littlest, always. And people would say all the time, we did too, how little he is. Oh, you're so little, you're so scrawny, or you know, that's not healthy either. Like I'm owning that as his parent, that I probably was no help to that situation either. And now it's, you know, he had this growth spurt where he put on, you know, he started lifting weights. He started like doing push-ups and things like that when he was like 12 or 13. And started, he wanted protein powders and he started to lift weights. And now he's, he put on, I think 40 pounds in like a little over a year or about a year. And he comes back to school and we're like, whoa, like he's transformed his body because of the hard work that he put into it. But, and I saw the difference it made in his confidence. And now again, he's talking about, he really loves lifting weights and stuff. And so he's really talking about the next year, how he wants to put on even more weight. And but it just, this conversation is so timely, because I think it's really important that it's not about exactly what, it's not, because I said, it's not, it matters what you eat to put on the weight. You don't want to just eat a bunch of junk, so anyway, it really is something that I should probably pick up your book. Yeah.
Yeah, because we all have to like live in a body, right? So
Yeah.
of course, and there's nothing wrong with like taking care of your body, and right, like, that's awesome that your son like wanted to do these things and accomplish them. But when when our bodies become like our sense of self-worth, or
Yes.
then it's no longer right, it's not right sized, sort of. It's
Yeah.
hard, it's hard to find that balance. And
That's what I'm feeling. That's what I'm
yeah,
feeling as his parent.
yeah,
Like, do I encourage this? It's like, you're perfect the way you are. Like, that's how you were made. And, I don't know, like I have those feelings about myself. We all have, this is an everybody problem. I
yeah,
think,
yeah, for
I don't care who you are, because
sure.
again, it comes back to, we all have a relationship to food. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
So when you were really struggling, what was something that was really helpful to you, that and how other people supported you?
I think for me, I hope I'm not a broken record with this, but it was such a relief to realize that I wasn't alone with this, because I did feel so kind of weird and like there was something wrong with me. I must be broken. And just to meet these like amazing men and mostly women, but some men who I really like admired, and who were really impressive people, but they also struggled with this and had so much kindness and a willingness to listen and share and connect. That was just hugely transformative for me. Just that realization that it's not some sort of moral issue that I have struggled with this. Doesn't mean I'm a bad person. And it's and one of the reasons too I wanted to write and share my story is just like this deep breath of relief of not being alone. I still feel that way, like 10 years into this journey. Like, oh, thank God.
Well, I think in grief too, and that's why I've said this on a few podcasts when it's come up, but the art for my podcast is me on an island with a megaphone, right? Because you feel so alone and you feel like you're screaming in the inside, and when you say something, then no one's listening, or they don't know what to say or how to support you.
Yeah. So just that, like, I'm here, I'm sending you some love, like those little things, they make such a difference, or they have to me, for sure.
Mm-hmm. I thought of a question.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
My tea went down the wrong way. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay.
I think I'm okay. Yeah.
Do you think a part of that obsession was to feel a sense of control in your life? I think maybe as teenagers, especially, like you feel like you have no control in your life. And so I think it's common. I mean, is that like?
Oh, absolutely. Definitely. I think right. It's, yeah, I mean, even today, like um, life is with this pandemic, where there's so many unknowns in the world, and being a new mom, my personal life sometimes feels really hard. And right, food is this like substance that, at least we think anyway, we can control. So that was a huge part of it for me. Um, and this kind of fantasy that if like my food is somehow perfect, that other things will be perfect too, but it doesn't really work out that way, unfortunately.
I'm
Or
going to tie
fortunately.
I'm going to tie this to grief, because in grief, one of the stirbs often mentioned or that people struggle with is with food. And with the pandemic, and people have lost people in their life, and or maybe their job, or they're struggling with, maybe they've lost friendships over the divide that's happened and all of the stuff that's going on. I just want people to reflect on what their relationship is to food today versus pre-pandemic, like, and how has that changed for them?
I've heard from friends and colleagues in the eating disorder world and read some things that this is a really tough time for, I mean, it makes sense because this is a tough time for so many people, like you said, for so many different reasons. And maybe food is also a symptom that shows up in people's lives. But I know that like eating disorder units in hospitals have been completely overbooked, and therapists have no room in their schedules. And I think this has come up in the last year and a half for so many of us. Yeah.
But the root isn't the food. That's what, and that's why I want to feel like it's important to say it. It's grief. Grief is the issue. Grief
Absolutely.
is our secondary pandemic to the pandemic, but I do think it was our pandemic well before the pandemic. But so what would you give for a tip to someone who might be struggling today?
Again, the reminder that you're not alone. There's so many people out there who are struggling too, or who have been through really, really, really hard, dark stuff and kind of come out the other side. And I would also say that, this too shall pass. People have told me that before, and sometimes it's like, oh, no, it won't. I'm going to feel this way forever. But even the most painful, awful feelings dissipate with time and some kindness. So it's not going to feel this way forever.
I want to reflect something back to you, because I think it's not just time, but you actually took action.
Yeah.
You sent an email that changed the trajectory of your life experience, that led to that
Absolutely.
group that you kept going back to for support. So you took action. And I just wanted
Yes.
to highlight that.
Yes, I think that's huge too. And I think sometimes when we're feeling at our worst, like action just feels so overwhelming. But right, even that a little like one email, a little step, a little showing up, reaching out to someone, making a call, taking a moment for yourself, whatever it is, like these small actions really add up and create momentum. And for me, have led to change in a big way.
Yeah, growth is not in our comfort zones, for sure. So yeah, congratulations for stepping out. And I'm curious to how, when you found out you were pregnant with your first daughter, was that just kind of another hurdle that you felt like you had to like kind of tackle? Because, with my first, I gained like a ton of weight. And my relationship to food was was horrible then too. But so can you tell me, just kind of dig into that a little bit, like the
Yeah,
pregnancy and
sure. Well, my first pregnancy ended up with a miscarriage, which was one of the hardest things that I've been through, which was really tough. And even though it wasn't necessarily, I mean, it was very different than an eating disorder, but I felt some similar feelings in that my body had let me down. And so that kind of disappointment with my body in a way was familiar, although the scope felt bigger and sadder. But I think, and then pretty soon thereafter, I got pregnant again and had a healthy pregnancy and had my daughter Simone. And I was really kind of gearing up for, because I've heard so many stories of people I've heard people, the doctor is shaming them about gaining too much weight during their pregnancy, or right, they can't stop eating like, weird combinations of food. Or so I heard so many stories, and I was worried about what was going to happen. But I feel like it was really thanks to recovery that I was able to pretty much trust my body. I definitely, like, I was nauseous in the early days, and I ate a ton of bagels with butter, which is like not a huge part of my usual diet, but that's what felt good. And I'm so grateful that I could just, okay, that's, I ate a lot of bagels with butter for a few months. Nothing bad came of that. So I feel like very lucky that it was a much more positive and serene experience than I had expected that it would be. And I definitely gained weight, and I definitely had uncomfortable thoughts because, as women, we're really taught that, like, even like any kind of weight gain is like taboo in a way, even when we're growing a baby. But I was also like so proud of my body. Like, it made this amazing baby. And, people had said, I've heard this advice in recovery and in general for having like a healthy body image, to kind of appreciate your body for what it does, right? We're giving hugs, we're walking around, we're, all these things that our bodies do instead of how they look. But that, to me, that was just kind of like words. But then once my body was like making a baby, that felt really real. Like, whoa, this is crazy. It's wild, that we grow babies inside of ourselves. So it gave me a really new appreciation for my body and how amazing it was.
Do you think that actually too helped transform, like, and kind of trickled into your relationship with food too? But, because I think it really comes down to
Definitely.
self-love, right? Like self-love. And
Absolutely. And I still held on to some, like we all do, we all kind of, it's not like one day we're sick and then the next day we're completely perfectly well. Like, we kind of have these old ideas. And I think that there was still a part of me that was that was kind of like thought, it was always better to eat something that was lighter. Like, there's always a little part of me that wanted to restrict my food, and that kind of turned off when I was pregnant, because also I was just like really hungry. I didn't feel that judgment towards myself, because I was like, no, I'm growing another person. And yeah, I think it's really been a positive thing for my food and body relationship.
how about postpartum?
Yeah. I feel like I had such an intense postpartum experience because it was right at those early days of pandemic times, where we ended up kind of packing up my parents' car, because my husband and I lived in an apartment in New York City, and moving in with my parents for a while. Um, and so I had gone from this like light, and I'm a food writer. And so, my life has always involved like going to eat all these wonderful restaurant meals, and hosting cheese tastings. And then all of a sudden we were like going to the grocery store as little as we could, and stocking up in those early days. And um, so food was really different, but it was also kind of nice to like cook our own meals. And my mom is a great cook, and she cooked a lot for us, which was such a treat. Um, so it was interesting. And I was worried too. I've heard these people like fear about their bodies changing in all these crazy ways, and my body changed in a lot of ways, and I don't necessarily feel like amazing about all of them, but it was like, okay, I ended up fitting into my clothes that I was wearing before pregnancy like perfectly fine with some time. And I kind of felt like the less I obsessed about it, the more things just kind of worked out and took care of themselves. And I hope that that's the case for the second time around.
Well, and I think a key component to that is having support along the way too. You know, you said you
Oh yeah,
continue with therapy and you have, you know, family that supports you and all of that. And I think that's so important. And the friendships that you've made throughout recovery that you still have. And
absolutely. Because there's definitely still like shaky moments and anxious moments that I have, and I think we all do, but they used to really just like take over my life, and now they're just a small part of the day.
well, it's just like when when a special day comes around, you know, an anniversary of the death of someone or diagnosis or something like that, you know it's coming and you kind of can plan for it. But many grievers, they have to take that time and give themselves the time to take care of themselves during those days. And it's recognizing within ourselves what we need, you know, so that, yeah.
Right.
Um, what would you like to scream to the world and wish people knew about your grief and experience?
Well, let's see. I mean, I felt, let's see, going for in terms of grief, I was kind of shocked how deeply sad and how much loss I felt when I lost this pregnancy. Um, and I think in a way, in a similar way to the eating disorder experience, it really helped me. I started to, I remember like just a few days later watching these clips on YouTube of Beyonce talking about her pregnancy loss. And it was like, oh, okay, Beyonce went through this. I mean, I don't know. I'm not, I like Beyonce, but I'm not like obsessed with Beyonce or something, but it's just, it felt so healing. Or reading other people's stories. And I think just that like you are not alone, you have people who love you, we can get through this together.
And what throughout your grief experience and what gives you the most joy and hope for the future?
I'm sorry, can you say the first part of the question again?
Throughout your grief experience, what has given you the most joy and what gives you hope for the future? Like
I
throughout this
think
whole
there's,
journey.
yeah, I think there really is, like we kind of touched on this crazy alchemy of how something that felt like the worst part of my life, certainly like the most painful, shameful stuff, became this really positive thing in a way because it helped me show up in such a deeper way. It helped me connect with people who I really love today. Um, it helped me kind of grow emotionally and like as a human. So I feel like that still to me feels wild that what I thought was the worst thing has turned out to be something that I'm grateful for, like genuinely. And if you would have told me that like years ago, I would have maybe laughed, but it's true.
I would say the same thing about my
Cool.
life.
Yeah.
And it comes back to your books. And those wouldn't be out today if you wouldn't have had this experience and you wouldn't be where you are today without recovery.
Yeah, I got this new book. Yeah.
Oh, that's a beautiful cover.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's really, I really love how it came out. Yeah, and it feels like such a joy. I mean, I've always loved to write and always wanted to write a book, and now here I am getting to do that, and it just feels like the biggest privilege.
So you never imagined yourself as an author,
Well, I
like a
did
published?
imagine I hoped to be a published author, but it felt a little bit like a pipe dream, and now it's
Yeah.
my reality.
So tell us a little bit about your books.
Absolutely. So the first book called Feast, they're both memoirs, so they're both personal stories. The first one is about um, this journey working through restaurants and food stores and falling in love with food, and also about this struggle and recovery from the eating disorder. So it's really a book about my like food journey. And then Plenty is about meeting my husband. It's about experiencing this miscarriage and then again a pregnancy. And it's also about finding a community of amazing women in the food world. So there's a chapter about a cheesemaker, there's a chapter about a sommelier, there's a chapter about a barge pilot who barges around the south of France to amazing food. So, you know, it starts with myself, but then I also talk about all these other amazing food women.
Very nice. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
I think that's it. Thank you so much. What a joy to get to talk, and thank you for your beautiful questions.
And thank you so much for being here. And where can people find you if they want to reach out?
I have a website, hannahhoward.nyc, and I'm on Instagram. I'm Hannah M. Howard.
And I will put the links for the books and your contact info on the show notes. Thank you again for this timely conversation. I know I'm going to reflect on it well after today and give, honestly, more deep thought into my personal relationship with food and how I want to emulate how important it is that we really truly think about our food in a nourishing way for our spirit, for our bodies, rather than like this thing that you just have to eat to sustain yourself just so you wake up tomorrow. You know, it's like, it's more than just that, right? And
right. I mean, right, we do have to eat to sustain ourselves, but then, there's sort of concentric circles for sure. I feel like I've also been writing about food for so many years, and every time I think, am I going to get bored of this? Like, no, there's so much more to explore in so many levels and ways that it touches on us culturally and emotionally and historically and agriculturally and environmentally, and just a huge topic, and it's so rich, and I love getting to explore it.
It is. I think there's so many layers to it. I never really thought a lot of it either until I was preparing for our conversation. And I mean, you think about it, it touches our economy, our homes, and it stems back to our childhood and our culture and how we were raised with food and just all of it. Yeah, it's fascinating. So I look forward to digging in a little bit more into my own relationship with food, prompted by your conversation and or our conversation and your great shares. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And remember, when you unleash your heart, you unleash your life. Much love.